Okay, the reading is, can you hear me? No. The reading is from John chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, on page 1064. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 80 to 120 litres. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," so they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who drew the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine, after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and his disciples, and they stayed for a few days.
Thank you, Oriel. So it is Pentecost, and we're looking at the wedding at Cana. There is a link, honest, and hopefully we'll find it later on. This is part of the series, God Created Humanity. And we had the first week, we looked at God created humanity in his image and likeness. That was what Ruth was talking to us about, that we're his image, his likeness, his representative on earth, to transform this earth, to represent him, a physical reality of God on earth. Second week, we had God created humanity for work, and that actually we looked at the idea that with being his image and likeness, we had a job to do, and we're obliged to do it, to represent him, to work the earth, to be responsible for it, to name and to subdue, and that actually work is a good thing, and that actually there is such a thing in this fallen world as bad work, and that actually people in slavery, people in low earning jobs that are taken advantage of, is not of this kingdom. And then the following week, we had the God created humanity for rest. And we had this big challenge, this idea that actually in West London, that when we work that every hour that God sends, and we get home and collapse in a heap, and we go to bed and we get up early to go to work, and this monotonous thing, that actually God calls us to rest. And that he models that. He rested on the seventh day. He rested from his work and saw that it was good. We rest, and the expectation to rest and recuperate and to have Sabbath. And if you haven't heard any of those talks or you missed them, I highly recommend them. Ruth, Richard and Rory did a fantastic job of exploring that. If you missed it, get on the YouTube channel and watch those again. And we are looking now, the second half, at the idea of this celebration. Last week, we looked at God celebrating as Passover, this idea of remembering what God has done for us. The idea that Passover is remembering what God had done for the Israelites, that had taken them from a place of bondage, a place of slavery, so that they could freely worship him in a promised land. And this week, we are looking at the wedding and Cana. There we go. That didn't pick it up on a thing. You know what I mean. Wedding at Cana. Hey, though. And we're also going to look at a celebration of Pentecost. So, if you can turn to your Bibles, get hold of the Bibles, they are around, and turn to page 1064, and we are going to look at the wedding at Cana. First up, we have on the third day in verse 1. The idea that John's Gospel, it's a very immediate thing. It kind of anchors in the first few verses. If you flick over to the previous page, John's Gospel is anchored well and truly in the Old Testament. It's part of a bigger message. John, the author, goes, look, it's a big picture here. It's not just the Gospel. It links to other stuff. And that's what happens in the first few verses there. In the first chapter, we have the link in the Old Testament. We have John the Baptist. We have the disciples called, all in one chapter. It's quick, it's to the point. There you go. Well and truly, this is what John's Gospel is about. As opposed to, if you look in Matthew in the first Gospel, in the first few chapters, he's still talking about who's related to who. And it goes on at great length with bizarre names like salmon. And it's in the genealogy. If you don't believe me, have a look. And they just go on about who's related to who. And he takes his time, Matthew's Gospel. Mark, very similar in the speed to John's Gospel. It's like the Daily Mail. And then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And it's a fantastic Gospel, but it's written very differently. Luke, lots of story, lots of foretelling about babies in wounds, jumping and acknowledging what's going on, and women singing. And so we have these different Gospels telling the same story very different ways. John's Gospel, grounded in the Old Testament, has a real immediacy to it. By the second chapter, you've got Jesus at the age of 33. We know he's at the age of 33 because the Jewish tradition in the rabbis is that you can't do anything to do with teaching until the age of 33. You're not seen as somebody who's got that type of experience or talk and any worth. So Jesus, age of 33, and he's at a wedding. On the third day, the wedding took place. Took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus' disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no wine. It's one of those moments where it's a proud mum moment. With obviously some stuff has been going on previously between Jesus being born and the age of 33, where Mary knew something that Jesus was about. The wine had gone. The wedding tend to go on for about 3 or 4 days in that culture. Lots of drinking, lots of dancing, lots of eating. A really good celebration. It was seen as a bit of a kind of a snub to your guests if stuff ran out. So this was a big faux pas that the wine had run out. And she, come on, son, Jesus, can you do something? Do as he says, do as he says. And when I was reading this and writing this, I remember the time when I was 4. And it was one of my very early memories. And I used to have it, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, and some of you who are slightly younger won't know this at all, but I used to have a tartan blazer. I looked at right rumming in it, and a tartan blazer, and my grandma, and there's a picture, it's a horrible picture, and my grandma looked like Sissy and Ada out of Les Dawson, and I was stood next to my grandma in this tartan blazer, and when I used to wear it, my grandma used to say, go on then, do your Bruce Forsyth, and that's lost on a lot of you, but he used to do that, and because I had the blazer like him, I thought I was a bee's knees in it. With my curly blonde hair, and those were the days. And but yeah, it was just like it was Mary and Mother. Go on, do your thing, do your thing, do your thing. And his response, which apparently, if you look at the footnote where it says in verse 4, woman, if you look at A, the Greek for woman does not denounce any disrespect. So it's not woman. It's mum, it's woman. It's a respectful thing, okay? Why do you involve me, Jesus replied. My hour has not yet come. And as Lauren dropped me in it the previous week, if you want to know what he means by that, ask Lauren afterwards. My hour has not yet come. His mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Next point, nearby 6 stone water jars. 6 stone water jars, a kind used by Jews for ceremonial washing. We could look at that and we could all get excited about ceremonial cleansing, about being clean, about being holy, and go, look, Jesus is illustrating this by taking the water for ceremonial washing that makes things clean and make it into wine, which again is part of the sacrificial thing in Leviticus. Don't get me started on that. We could be here for hours. The reason why I'm rushing, because I've got a lot to get to. But anyway, stone water could be do with cleansing, could be do with covenant. But then you fast forward a little bit to verse 10, and this wine has appeared, and it's amazing. And then in verse 10 it said, everyone, this is the steward, brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine afterward, when the guests have had too much to drink. But you've saved the best till now. Again, we could look at Old Covenant, the idea that the people of God were chosen through grace to be his people. But then the new covenant, that everybody has access to this. And the kind of old wine, the water, into the new wine of this kingdom. And we could read it like that. Or we could go, and I couldn't remember the theologian who said this. Again, ask Lauren afterwards. I'm sure she knows. When you read these books, can you remember who said that? Sometimes wine is just wine. Get over it and try not to read things into it. And I can't remember who said that, but I'll just a random quote. Or is that what's going on? Is that just it? So what we're going to do in the next couple of minutes is do a bit of a geography lesson. I feel like I should wear Rory's jacket from the other week with the patches on the elbows and looking a bit kind of geography-like, but I don't like jackets. But when I was, this time last year, I was out in Israel, and we had a guide, a Christian guide, showing us around, telling us all these stories, and he brought me this insight. What tended to happen is everybody rushed off into looking and taking hundreds of pictures, and I used to try and find the nearest air conditioning unit and lean on it, and because it was so hot. And I used to stand with the guide, and he used to tell me stories and things, and he brought me this amazing insight into the wedding at Cana that I think is incredible. Now, you can't see this brilliantly, but if you're near, that is basically a map of the northern bit of Israel. The patch of blue on the right is the Sea of Galilee, and if you look a little bit there, oh crumbs, what happened then? I went backwards. And if you look a bit there, that is a city called Tiberias, where if you go today, it's like kind of Blackpool with heat. And there's lots of commercial stuff going. No, it is. No, it is. Can I just say, there is a water park on the Sea of Galilee now. You can go down water tubes into the Sea of Galilee. It's appalling. But anyway, it's Tiberias, that's the city, that's the main city of that area. And it's absolutely incredible. And I'm going to circle again. That is where Cana is. It's about 10 miles from Tiberias in the northern bit of Israel. At this point in time, Tiberias is the main city. Cana, it's a bit of a kind of one-horse town. There is a church there you can go and have a look at, and there's a mosaic in it, and there's kind of stories to tell and look, and it really is quite special. But what I want to do, and this is what the Christian guide told me about, was a city just 5 miles, just under 5 miles from Cana, called Sudworth. It's a city that at that point, it's not a lost city. It's kind of lost its reason to be at the minute. But when it was at Jesus' time, it was the center of that commercial district. They used to worship a god called Dionysus, and the main product out of that city was wine. So less than 5 miles from Cana, there was a major city that produced, and this is the quote they'd have on the bottles, and if you get wine from this area, they used to say it's kind of the best wine in the area. It is referred to in Josephus, these historical documents, as the best wine in the area. Interestingly enough, it's also the city where Mary originally, her family came from. It's Mary's hometown. It's the main city for wine, and they used to worship the god Dionysus, who is also the god of what? Anybody? Also the god of wine. Now, this isn't, I don't think, a coincidence. Just replay it a minute. Jesus, at the start of his ministry was at a wedding less than 5 miles away from the biggest city in that area that used to worship a god called Dionysus, who used to be the god of wine, that used to produce the best wine in the area. And Jesus, at this party, when the wine runs out, takes 6 of these big stone jars and produces the finest wine that anybody had tasted. Now, to me, that is, and I tried to find a clip of, American wrestlers shout at each other and try and put each other down. And because in my mind, I had a mental picture of Jesus just stepping up into this area, the first miracle in the area where they used to worship this other god, and go, beat that. Beat that. Because I am the God that everyone should worship. He goes steaming into this area and does this supernatural physical mic drop and walks out victorious. This is incredible reading of this passage that just blew me away, and I think it's not a coincidence that we prayed against these principalities and powers that surround us today, of debt and of modern day slavery. And it just flicked to the Ephesians reading. We're just going to land it with Ephesians 6 on page 1177, Ephesians 6 verse 12. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against those rulers, against those authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Jesus didn't just do a parlor trick. He didn't just do a kind of, hey, there we go, there's some water into wine, and walked away. He stepped into the devil's backyard and produced the most amazing wine and walked away victorious. And this is the God that we worship. This is the God that we want to celebrate at this Pentecost. This is the God that we come and worship every week. It's not a passive God. It's a God that gets emotionally, just torrent of emotion when he sees people riddled with debt. This is a God that wants to step into our area and make a transforming difference. This is our God that started a church at Pentecost 2,000 years ago. The best hope for this world is a bunch of us filled with his Spirit that doesn't do parlor tricks but transforms for the kingdom of God. Let's stand, let's bow our heads, and let's respond to God now.